You step out of a perfectly lit, multi-million-dollar kitchen, leave behind the curated aesthetic of a viral social media feed, and suddenly you are sitting in the fluorescent glare of a pediatric oncology ward.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the contrast is just incredibly sharp.
It really is. The cameras flash, the crowd freezes, and just like that, Hollywood has a new obsession. But today, we're looking at a deeply personal reality unfolding right behind the filters of one of the internet's most recognizable families. Welcome to Starscope Report.
Yes, welcome in, everyone. Here we uncover the stories shaping Hollywood, the music industry, and viral influencer culture. From red carpet surprises to social media controversies, we dive deep into the stories behind the fame.
Exactly. And today's deep dive is taking a viral celebrity headline, but we aren't using it for gossip. Our mission today is to use this headline as a lens to examine a critical, heavily guarded medical reality.
Right? We are looking at the recent emotional update by the 24-year-old model and TikTok influencer Nara Smith. She recently announced that her 2-year-old daughter, Whimsy Lou, has finally entered remission after an 8-month battle with cancer.
It is such a heavy story, and just so you know where we're getting all this, we are pulling from a huge spectrum of sources today.
We are. We've got the entertainment and news reporting, so outlets like LED Bible, The Shade Room, Parade, Hindustan Times, East Coast Radio, Yardbarker, The Tab, and ITV News to really build out the personal human timeline.
But we are also layering that with something very different. We're bringing in clinical research data directly from the Lajala Institute for Immunology, or LJI, to unpack the hard scientific reality of pediatric cancer.
Because treating childhood cancer is vastly different and honestly much more difficult than treating adult cancer. And we're going to get into exactly why that is.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when you look at Nara Smith's online presence, it is, it's the absolute epitome of domestic tranquility.
Oh, totally. She is famous for these incredibly viral trad wife-style TikToks.
Right, where she cooks these elaborate meals completely from scratch.
Exactly. Wearing designer clothes, speaking in that very soft, serene voice. And she and her husband, the 26-year-old model Lucky Blue Smith, they recently moved from Texas to a $1.4 million home in Ridgefield, Connecticut.
Yeah, they were seeking a slower, friendlier life to raise their growing family.
And it is a growing family. They share 4 young children together. There's Rumble Honey, Slim Easy, Whimsy Lou, and Fawnie Golden.
Plus Lucky's older daughter from a previous relationship, Gravity Blue.
Right. So to the outside world, it looked like this rapidly expanding family was just settling into their dream home, living this perfect life.
But the timeline of what was actually happening off camera is just incredibly heavy. Late last year, Nara and Lucky noticed what they described as, and this is a quote, something suspicious, on 2-year-old Whimsy.
Yeah, they took her to the ER, and the doctors there, they couldn't immediately identify the problem, which, led them to their pediatrician.
And Nara described this heartbreaking moment. She said her pediatrician went completely quiet and calm, and in that moment she just realized something was terribly wrong.
It gives you chills. That visit was followed by x-rays, ultrasounds, and a biopsy. And the devastating result was cancer that had already spread, which required immediate chemotherapy.
Notably, they have chosen not to disclose the specific type of cancer Whimsy was fighting, which, makes total sense.
Absolutely. The physical and logistical toll of that diagnosis is immediate. They were thrust into a regimen of intense medical intervention.
And Nara was navigating all this grief, the hospital visits, balancing her massive online platform, all while she was postpartum with her newborn, Fawnie Golden.
I cannot even imagine the strength that takes.
I know. What really stands out in the sources is when Nara talked about the hair loss. It's one thing to hear the word cancer, but she shared this visceral reality of finding Whimsy's tiny curls on her pillow.
Oh, man.
Or like finding hair caught in her fingers after bath time and realizing she wouldn't be brushing her 2-year-old's hair much longer.
That is just a profound level of grief happening completely behind the scenes of a very public life.
It is, but I have to say, it is so jarring to think that millions of people were watching Nara's serene cooking videos without knowing she was spending hours in a pediatric oncology ward.
Right. It's a crazy juxtaposition.
Why hide it for 8 months if you have a platform of millions? Wouldn't you want the support?
Well, what's fascinating here is Nara's deliberate choice. She waited until Whimsy was in remission to share the story. She wanted to know the outcome before finding the words.
That makes sense. You need to process it first.
Exactly. But more importantly, when she did share it, she specifically chose not to ask for donations for her own family.
Wait, really? With a platform that big?
Yeah. Instead, she pointed her followers to charities and GoFundMe pages for other families. Going through those chemo treatments opened her eyes to the staggering financial toll of medical care.
Oh.
She shed light on what so many families battle privately. She pointed resources toward those who might not have a multi-million-dollar home to weather such a severe financial storm.
That is incredible. And if you're loving these Hollywood twists and deep dives into the real stories behind the fame, make sure you're subscribed. We've got even crazier stories ahead.
Yes, definitely hit that subscribe button. Because Nara's feeling that she was battling this in secret, at least until she connected with other families in the hospital, it naturally leads us to the broader statistics of pediatric cancer.
Because Whimsy's story, as heartbreaking as it is just one point in a massive data set.
Sadly, yes. The numbers from the Lajala Institute for Immunology really give us the macro view here. Every single year in the United States, 15,780 children are diagnosed with cancer.
That is so many kids.
It is. And globally, that number exceeds 400,000 cases annually.
Wow. And this brings up a foundational misunderstanding about the disease itself. Because when adults get cancer, we are immediately conditioned to look at lifestyle or environmental factors, right?
Right, exactly.
We ask if they smoked for 20 years, what their diet was like, if they had prolonged sun exposure. But you can't apply those metrics to a 2-year-old.
You really can't. Childhood cancers are biologically completely distinct from adult cancers. The research shows they are rarely tied to environmental or lifestyle factors.
So where do they come from?
They were primarily caused by genetic mutations that occur very early in life, and often even before birth, in utero.
That is just wild to think about.
Yeah, the DNA changes just happen during the complex process of fetal development. We are still mapping exactly why, but the data shows that 1 in 6 children diagnosed with cancer actually have a genetic predisposition to it.
Okay, so to put this in perspective, if adult cancer is often the result of cumulative external damage, like a car engine breaking down after decades of wear and tear, or running on bad fuel, pediatric cancer is like a glitch in the factory software before the car even rolls off the assembly line. It's an error hardwired into the cellular programming from the very start.
That is a perfect analogy. And taking that further, a glitch in the factory software requires a completely different diagnostic manual than a broken engine part.
Right.
It's a foundational error in how the cells are told to divide and grow.
So what does this all mean? If we know that childhood cancer is this genetic software glitch, and we have all this modern medical technology, why are we still struggling so much to help these kids?
It's incredibly frustrating.
Right. Because we hear about new cancer breakthroughs for adults all the time.
Well, the answer is deeply systemic, and it begins with the economics of medical research. There is a staggering funding disparity.
Okay, lay it on me.
While the federal government is the single largest funder of childhood cancer research, only 4% of the national cancer budget is allocated to pediatric oncology.
Wait, only 4%?
Just 3%.
And that's simply because of the math of the population, right?
Exactly. Because pediatric cancer, despite the devastating human toll, represents less than 1% of all new cancer diagnoses in the U.S. each year.
So it just doesn't command the massive financial investment that adult cancers do.
Right. Breast cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer. These affect millions of adults, so they get the lion's share of federal funding. And furthermore, pharmaceutical companies operate on a profit incentive.
Sure, developing a new drug costs billions.
Exactly. It is incredibly difficult for them to justify that research and development cost for a market that represents less than 1% of patients.
So pediatric cancer research is essentially treated like an orphan disease by the market, leaving it heavily reliant on private philanthropies and individual donors just to keep the lights on in these labs.
Spot on. And the downstream effect of that funding gap is a massive treatment gap. The sources note there are over 200 cancer drugs that have been developed and approved for adults.
Okay.
But of children. Only 6 drugs are approved for use in the first instance of cancer treatment.
6 versus 200, that is just unacceptable.
It is.
But the immediate reaction from anyone outside the medical field, like me, is, why can't we just adjust the dosage? If you have a highly effective adult cancer drug, why not just cut the dose down to fit a 30-pound toddler?
Because children are not miniature adults. And this introduces what oncologists call the toxicity problem.
Okay, what is that?
A child's body is in a state of rapid, constant development. They're building bone mass, their neural pathways are wiring, their organs are maturing. Adult cancer drugs often work by interrupting specific cellular signaling pathways.
Like telling cells to stop dividing.
Right. So if you give an adult drug to a child, you aren't just starving the tumor, you are shutting down the exact biological processes that a child needs to grow their brain, their bones, and their organs.
Ah, you're blocking the tumor, but you're also blocking the child's typical development.
Precisely. So consequently, children are often treated with decades-old therapies, broad-spectrum chemotherapies and radiation protocols that are incredibly toxic to developing bodies.
Which means the cost of survival is agonizingly steep.
The clinical data reveals a heavy reality. 95% of childhood cancer survivors will face significant long-term health issues by the time they reach age 45.
95%. That is essentially every single survivor dealing with a chronic condition by midlife.
Every single one. And we are talking about secondary cancers caused directly by the radiation they received as a toddler, severe heart disease, infertility, and cognitive impairment. These are directly resulting from these toxic treatments.
You survive the fire, but you spend the rest of your life dealing with the structural damage to the house.
Exactly.
But wait till you hear what comes next, because the medical community is not just accepting this. Here's where it gets really interesting. Science is actively fighting back against these outdated protocols.
Yes. This is where the cutting-edge work at the Lajala Institute for Immunology becomes so critical. They are finding new ways to attack the root mechanics of the disease.
And later in the episode, we'll talk about the shocking twist nobody saw coming with how these treatments are evolving. But first, let's look at how these genetic glitches occur.
Right. LJI is pioneering research into a fascinating phenomenon called chromothripsis.
Okay, just looking at the word itself, chromo meaning chromosome, and thripsis coming from the Greek word for shattering.
It is quite literal. Under certain conditions, a cell's chromosome doesn't just mutate, it completely shatters into dozens or hundreds of fragments.
That sounds catastrophic.
It is. When this happens, the cell's repair proteins panic. They scramble to take the DNA back together so the cell can survive, but they do it hastily and in the completely wrong order.
So the cell survives, but the genetic code is completely scrambled. It stitches the DNA back together into this, like, Frankenstein sequence.
Exactly. And the consequence of that rushed repair job is that it accidentally turns on oncogenes, the genes that tell a cell to multiply relentlessly.
While turning off the tumor suppressor genes.
Right. It creates a highly mutated, deeply aggressive cancer cell. LGI is studying how this specific shattering event drives aggressive cancer development, particularly in subtypes of acute lymphocytic leukemia, or ALL.
And all accounts for about 10% of childhood diagnoses. But the silver lining here is that because of targeted research, all now has a 70% survival rate 5 years out from treatment.
Which is amazing. It shows what is actually possible when the scientific community focuses on a specific pediatric mechanism.
But the goal now isn't just survival, it's survival without that 95% toxicity rate.
And that requires moving away from the blunt instruments of traditional chemo and shifting focus to immunotherapy, using the body's own immune system to fight the cancer.
Which is incredible. But cancer cells are notoriously good at disguising themselves as healthy cells, right, to avoid detection.
They are. But LJI is working to unmask them using a massive new tool called the CEDAR database. It stands for the Cancer Epitope Database and Analysis Resource.
Okay, let's break down epitope because that is the key to this whole system.
Think of an epitope as a highly specific, unique sequence of amino acids on the surface of a cell. Even when a cancer cell is disguised, it usually has a mutated epitope protruding from its surface.
Like a flaw in the disguise.
Exactly. It's the specific marker that the immune system's T cells can actually bind to and recognize as a threat. The CEDAR database is mapping and cataloging these epitopes.
So the CEDAR database is essentially a global cellular wanted poster.
I love that, yes.
It maps out the exact molecular fingerprint of the cancer cell. And once we have that fingerprint, we can engineer the body's internal bounty hunters, the T cells, to specifically hunt down cells wearing that exact marker.
Right, so it exclusively attacks the bad cells while leaving the healthy developing cells alone.
So if we know this works, Jamie, skipping the names. If we know this works, what is the main bottleneck keeping these targeted immunotherapies from becoming the standard of care for every child tomorrow?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the bottleneck is really twofold. First, there's a severe issue of sample scarcity.
Because the patients are spread thin across the country.
Exactly. Pediatric cancer makes up less than 1% of new diagnoses, so the patient populations are small. There are about 500,000 pediatric tissue samples globally, but they are siloed behind different hospital firewalls and privacy laws.
So scientists ready to do the work can't get their hands on enough tissue samples to map these epitopes.
Right. And the second bottleneck brings us right back to the beginning. Funding.
Of course.
Moving a discovery from a lab through rigorous clinical trials and into a standard protocol requires massive financial resources. This lack of dedicated funding slows down the translation of this trailblazing science into accessible bedside treatments.
It's a stark reality check. When you see a viral headline about an influencer like Nara Smith, or you watch those serene, highly produced videos, it's easy to forget the profound vulnerability that exists behind the screen.
Absolutely.
But beneath that curated surface is a very real 2-year-old girl named Whimsy Lou, who had to endure 8 months of toxic treatments just to survive a genetic software glitch she was born with.
Cancer doesn't care about a curated aesthetic or a follower count. But Whimsy's story is also a testament to the science we do have. Her curls are returning. She's in remission.
And she represents a growing demographic that our medical infrastructure urgently needs to recognize. Stay tuned and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next, because this next part affects millions of people.
Right. Thanks to modern medicine, the population of childhood cancer survivors in the U.S. is steadily growing. Currently, they make up 28% of the entire survivor population.
That is a massive new generation of adults.
It is. And as these children grow up, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. How must our healthcare system fundamentally redesign itself to care for these adults?
Oh, yeah.
They are living with the chronic, hidden side effects of the very treatments that saved their lives. How we fund, track, and care for that specific demographic is the next great challenge.
From the perfectly curated social feeds to the cutting-edge labs mapping cellular fingerprints, you can see that the fight is far from over. But the map is getting clearer.
Keep questioning what you see and keep looking deeper.
You've been listening to Starscope Report, where we uncover the stories shaping Hollywood, music, and pop culture. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that keep the stars shining.